What if I told you that deep in the United States, far from busy highways and crowded cities, there exists a horror museum so disturbing that people who enter it never come back the same, and some never come back at all? Long before fear becomes visible, before footsteps echo through its halls, the Black Hollow Horror Museum, hidden in a forgotten part of Louisiana, already knows who is coming. The road leading to it is cracked and broken, swallowed by thick fog that rolls unnaturally close to the ground, wrapping around the tires like fingers that don't want to let go, while dead trees line both sides, twisted in shapes that resemble reaching arms frozen mid-scream. For friends, Adam, Lisa, Mark, and Sophie arrived just before nightfall, their car headlights cutting through the fog as they laughed nervously, excited to film what they believe would be their most viral horror vlog yet, completely unaware that the moment they crossed into this place, they were no longer just visitors. A rusted metal sign stood crooked near the entrance, its red letters faded but still readable, carrying a warning that felt more like a threat. If you feel watched, you already are. Adam smirked and joked that it was perfect marketing. Lisa teased that she wasn't scared of cheap horror tricks. Mark adjusted his camera with excitement, already imagining the views, while Sophie felt a sudden chill run down her spine for no logical reason, as if something unseen had leaned in close to breathe near her ear. The museum itself looked wrong, old in the land around it, its dark walls stained as if they had absorbed decades of pain, its windows pitch black, reflecting nothing, not even people standing right in front of them. And when Adam pushed the heavy front door open, it creaked loudly, not like old wood, but like a sound meant to announce their arrival to something waiting inside. The door slammed shut behind them once they stepped in, though none of them turned around to notice. Inside, the air was unnaturally cold, sharp enough to sting their lungs, carrying a faint smell of dust, rust, and something metallic that lingered at the back of the throat, while dim yellow lights flickered above, barely illuminating the first hall labeled Serial Killer's Collection. Glass cases lined the walls, displaying real murder weapons, blood-stained clothing, handwritten confessions, execution photographs, and personal belongings taken directly from crime scenes, each exhibit feeling disturbingly authentic, as though it had been removed only moments ago. Mark zoomed his camera in on a knife still dark with dried blood, joking nervously about true crime fans loving this, while Adam narrated confidently, trying to sound fearless, though his voice echoed in a strange, stretched way, repeating itself a fraction of a second longer than it should have, as if the walls were listening closely. Lisa laughed to hide her unease, commenting that the place felt too real, while Sophie stood quietly, her eyes scanning the room, sensing that the silence here was different, heavier, as if it were holding its breath. At the center of the hall stood a single glass box separated from the others, containing an old porcelain doll with cracked white skin, tangled yellow hair, and lifeless black eyes that absorbed the dim light around it, making the shadows nearby seem deeper. The plaque beneath it was small and unsettlingly vague, reading only, recovered from a closed crime scene. Cause of death unknown. Lisa leaned closer, mocking the doll and joking that it looked like something from a low-budget horror movie. But as she spoke, the temperature dropped suddenly. The lights flickered once more, and the doll's eyes blinked slowly, deliberately. The laughter died instantly. Mark lowered the camera, swearing he hadn't edited anything. Adam insisted it had to be a mechanical trick, yet no wires were visible, no movement could be explained. And when Sophie placed her trembling hand against the glass, she flinched because it felt warm, almost alive. Her heart began to race as a crushing sensation settled in her chest, the overwhelming feeling that the doll wasn't just being displayed, but was aware of them, watching, listening, waiting. The longer they stood there, the stronger the presence became, as if something ancient and patient had awakened, something that had been trapped in this building for a very long time and had finally found new people worth noticing. And although none of them said it out loud, they all felt the same horrifying realization creeping into their minds. This museum wasn't designed to show horror. It was designed to choose it. The moment they stepped away from the porcelain doll, the museum seemed to change, not dramatically, but subtly enough to make their skin crawl, as if the building itself had shifted its attention fully onto them. And when Adam suggested moving to the next hall to keep filming, his confidence felt forced, almost desperate, because deep down he could sense that staying still was dangerous, yet moving forward felt worse. As they walked, the lights above flickered more aggressively, casting distorted shadows that didn't always match their movements, stretching too long across the walls and floors, occasionally twitching on their own, while the air grew heavier with each step, pressing down on her chest and making it harder to breathe. They reached the end of the hall and turned instinctively to look back toward the entrance, only to freeze in confusion when the door they had entered through was no longer there, replaced instead by a solid wall of dark concrete, cold and seamless, as though the door had never existed at all. Panic spread instantly. Lisa laughed nervously at first, insisting it was part of the museum's design. Mark stepped closer to the wall, running his hands across it, his voice shaking as he said there wasn't even a frame where the door should have been. And Sophie felt her stomach drop as she noticed new words slowly appearing on the wall beside them, letters carving themselves into the surface as if etched by invisible claws. Every exhibit wants a soul. Before anyone could speak, before fear could fully turn into terror, Mark screamed, a sharp, sudden sound that echoed violently through the hall, and when Adam and Lisa spun around, Mark was no longer there. His camera clattered to the floor, still recording, its lens pointed toward an empty space where he had been standing seconds earlier. Lisa shouted his name, her voice cracking, while Adam grabbed the camera with trembling hands, replaying the footage in disbelief, only to watch Mark's face twist in horror as something dark surged up behind him, dragging him backward into the wall itself, his body flattening unnaturally as if the concrete had turned liquid just long enough to swallow him whole. Almost immediately, a new display formed on the wall where Mark had vanished, a framed photograph that hadn't been there before, showing Mark's terrified face frozen mid-scream, his eyes wide, his mouth open, his hands pressed against invisible glass from inside. Lisa collapsed to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably, while Sophie backed away slowly, shaking her head, whispering that this was impossible, that none of this was real, yet the photograph's eyes followed them as they moved, tracking them with horrifying awareness. As Adam struggled to think, Sophie noticed a narrow doorway at the far end of the hall that hadn't been there earlier, its sign flickering faintly. Archives. And driven by equal parts fear and desperation, they ran toward it, knowing that standing still meant becoming the next exhibit. Inside the archive room, the atmosphere was even worse. Rows of dusty filing cabinets, shelves stacked with old tapes, journals, police reports, and yellowed photographs, all documenting crimes, disappearances, and deaths linked to the museum across decades. Sophie pulled open a file marked Black Hollow Origin, her hands trembling as she read aloud fragmented entries describing how the museum was built over the site of an abandoned prison where inmates died violently, their suffering seeping into the walls, feeding something ancient and inhuman that learned to trap souls through objects connected to death. One line made her blood run cold. The museum does not kill. It invites, observes, and claims those whose fear makes them suitable. Lisa looked up, her face pale, realizing that Mark hadn't been randomly taken, that the museum had chosen him, and Adam felt a crushing weight of guilt as he remembered how Mark had been the most excited, the most careless, the most hungry for attention. As if reacting to their realization, the lights cut out completely, plunging the room into darkness, broken only by the faint glow of emergency lights, and in that silence, they heard whispers, not words, but breathing, dozens of slow, overlapping breaths surrounding them from every direction. Shadows began to move between the shelves, stretching unnaturally tall, brushing past them without touch, and Sophie realized with sickening clarity that these weren't shadows at all, but the remnants of people who had come before, trapped between exhibits, watching, waiting for replacements. A loud metallic bang echoed from somewhere deeper in the museum, followed by the sound of glass cracking. And as Lisa screamed that something was coming, Adam understood the horrifying truth. The museum wasn't done collecting, and it never would be. The emergency lights flickered as Adam grabbed Lisa's hand and pulled her out of the archive room, Sophie close behind them, all three running blindly through corridors that no longer followed any logical shape, bending and stretching as if the museum itself were alive, and deliberately rearranging its insides to confuse them. And with every step the whispers grew louder, clearer, no longer just breathing but fragments of voices, pleading, crying, laughing softly in broken madness. Voices that seemed to recognize them, calling their names in tones that sounded disturbingly familiar. Sophie stumbled, clutching her head as sudden images flooded her mind. Strangers screaming, bodies being dragged into walls, faces freezing behind glass, and she realized with terror that the museum wasn't just collecting souls. It was sharing memories, forcing new victims to experience the final moment of the old ones so fear could ripen inside them. They burst into a wide circular hall they hadn't seen before, its ceiling impossibly high, lined with glass exhibits glowing faintly from within, and at the center stood a single empty display case, taller than the others, its glass spotless, waiting, with metal plaque already attached that read only one word: reserved. Lisa stopped dead, her breath hitching as she stared at it, shaking her head and whispering that it couldn't be for them, that this wasn't how it was supposed to end, while Adam tried to pull her away. But the light suddenly brightened, illuminating the surrounding exhibits, revealing horrifyingly detailed displays of people frozen mid-agony, some clawing at the glass on the inside, others screaming silently, their eyes still wet, still alive. Sophie recognized one of them from the files, a woman reported missing 30 years ago, and as Sophie locked eyes with her, the woman's lips moved, forming a single word: run. Before Sophie could react, the temperature dropped violently, frost crawling across the floor, and a tall, faceless shadow rose behind Lisa, its form bending unnaturally, as if it had been assembled from smoke and darkness, and Lisa finally screamed, but the sound was cut short as invisible hands dragged her backward, her body slamming against the empty glass case as it liquefied just like the wall had for Mark, swallowing her whole in seconds. Adam lunged forward, screaming Lisa's name, pounding on the glass as her face appeared inside it, eyes wide with terror, mouth open in a silent cry, her hands pressed desperately against the barrier separating them, and the plaque beneath the case changed, letters carving themselves in real time to read: Lisa, fear of abandonment. Sophie collapsed to her knees, sobbing, the reality finally shattering her denial, as Adam felt something inside him break, a raw, animal panic tearing through his chest as he realized the museum knew them, knew their fears, their weaknesses, their secrets. The whispers turned into laughter, low and satisfied, echoing from every direction as the shadow retreated into walls, and Sophie screamed that they had to keep moving, that staying meant becoming permanent. They ran again, deeper into the museum, past halls labeled with names that hadn't existed before, halls clearly meant for future exhibits, until Sophie suddenly stopped, her expression going empty as she stared at a small mirror display ahead, and Adam followed her gaze only to see Sophie reflected not as she was, but as something hollow-eyed and broken, trapped behind glass. She began shaking uncontrollably, whispering that she understood now, that the museum didn't choose randomly, that it chose based on guilt, fear, and unresolved trauma, and before Adam could stop her, she stepped toward the mirror, pressing her hands against it as tears streamed down her face, confessing aloud a thing she had never told anyone, each word making the glass glow brighter, and with a sickening crack, the mirror pulled her in, sealing itself instantly, leaving Adam alone in the silence. Now completely broken, Adam staggered to the final corridor, the whispers fading into a dull hum as if the museum had already taken its fill, until he saw moonlight ahead, an exit door real, solid, and untouched by shadows. Summoning the last of his strength, he ran, bursting through the door and collapsing outside onto the cold ground, gasping for air as the museum behind him went completely dark and silent. Police later found him wandering the road in shock, his footage deleted, his friends officially declared missing, and the Black Hollow Horror Museum permanently sealed after investigators claimed it was completely empty inside, containing no exhibits at all. But visitors passing the abandoned building at night swear they sometimes see faint lights glowing through black windows, and inside, behind newly formed glass cases, 3 fresh exhibits now stand proudly displayed, while in the largest hall, a final case has been added, labeled The Only Survivor, containing a man whose eyes still move, whose lips still whisper warnings, and who now understands the most horrifying truth of all, that the museum never lets anything go, and surviving was simply the final exhibit it needed.